you. Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Everybody see that okay? Great. All right. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity to join your group and share something that we've been working on. As Elena was saying, our conversation for tonight is about using a constrained version of the design thinking discovery process to help teams struggling to get empowered under intense delivery pressure. Oops. Okay, there we go. Agenda for tonight, just a brief intro to me and LabZero, the company I work for. Quick overview of the problem that we've noticed. I'll share 2 examples of how we've addressed this problem with real clients. And then after a quick recap, I've planned some time for a little group discussion and Q&A if there's any questions. It's me. Hi, I'm Tracey. In over 20 years as a designer, I've worked with a variety of companies in various stages of growth. My experience is primarily in digital product design, and I spent a few years at IDEO developing paper-based tools for healthcare clients. So I've got a little bit of a range there. My work for LabZero has ranged from build the thing to build the team. And I'm grateful to have worked with some brilliant, talented people, both at LabZero and at the clients that we serve. Speaking of LabZero, we are consultants with a background in design, product, and engineering. And we help our clients with their digital products and services, either by lending our expertise and leadership or by integrating as members of their team. We aim to embody best practices while helping our client teams meet their goals. These are some of our current services. We've been working as strategic product design engineering partners, fractional leaders, managers, and operational partners. And these are some of our clients. We're very grateful for their many years of trust and partnership. There's a lot more than fit on this slide, and we feel really lucky to get to work with these companies. Digging into tonight's topic, we've noticed something over the years as consultants. Teams start with good intentions. Like, imagine we rallied around a vision that helped us build our MVP. And then suddenly, there's not enough time to think about what's next. A prospective customer says that they will sign once we have just a few more features, or we have to fix all the bugs that we'd said we'd do post-launch. Orgs change, especially as they enter a new stage. Many companies moving from the early stage to a growth stage feel the pressure to deliver. Planning and priorities change. Vision can take a backseat to delivery. It happens so quickly, teams might not realize they've shifted from building around a vision to reacting to a backlog. Your team might not be able to articulate the change, but they feel it. We've encountered a few signs that it's happening. For example, the team can't be confident that they're working on the right thing when things are constantly changing. Those frequent pivots mean they miss deadlines or opportunities. And the best they can do is try to empty a bottomless backlog without a connection to the why that would really help them feel engaged. They're on a delivery treadmill, creating and delivering tickets completely disempowered, and it feels terrible. I'd like to ask this group, what other signs and signals have you seen from teams that are facing this kind of delivery pressure? Like, how do you know when something's just like not right with your team?
Management acts different.
What was that?
Management acts different. You can just feel the tension.
Does that feel like like they have less trust in the team, or it's just sort of a non-specific dread?
I know for my experience at the last place that I left, micromanagement started to happen, and that wasn't a good working environment.
Yeah, that will take away that feeling of empowerment pretty fast. Oh yeah, one more one more bullet to appear there. We know that teams deserve better, and we know that we're supposed to build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. We know a shared vision gives each member of the team autonomy to make decisions to support desired outcomes. So why don't organizations fix it? At organizations that you've been a part of that have encountered this kind of problem, was there any kind of rationale that you saw for avoiding vision or discovery work? Was there anything that you felt like was keeping your team on this delivery treadmill?
The budget. Sense of not enough time. We don't have time for that. Takes too much time.
Mhm.
The vision doesn't get shared with the team,
Mm.
or it gets shared once, and the people who are sharing it say, "Well, we shared it."
Yeah, I've experienced that too.
That
Everyone knows what the vision is, surely. Right, go ahead.
that delivery treadmill you mentioned sounds like a great thing. The team is delivering, they're releasing, their velocity is going up sprint after sprint. Feels like a good thing. But when they don't see the impact of what they delivered and where it's leading, I see what you're talking about.
Can really start to feel like there's no end in sight. You know, we're
Like
not
a hamster.
milestones. Hey, what was that?
Like a hamster, start feeling like a hamster.
Yeah. In my experience, one of the big things that keeps organizations from addressing this is fear. We've encountered so many organizations that, whether they admit it or not, are afraid. You know, like we just heard, when most teams think of vision work, they think of a lengthy leadership suite process. Takes too much time. They think of this capital V vision deck that they will spend months on and no one will look at again. Forget delegating to their teams. When reactionary organizations fear the team can't deliver, they put all their emphasis on micromanaging or pushing deadlines in hopes that the teams will deliver faster. In this state, they can become too anxious to give autonomy, let alone time. Have I missed anything? Are there any other concerns?
Did you ever encounter the fear that people would be afraid that they actually have no strategy or vision for the product?
Oh, I don't think I've encountered that fully expressed, but I bet I have worked with some leaders that had that in the back of their mind, but maybe weren't saying things that led me to believe that. You know, it's pretty hard to be vulnerable in that way of like, maybe our strategy isn't really a strategy.
Can you expand on the take control away from leadership suite part?
Yeah, sure. One thing I found, not as much in the past few years, but I have encountered it, is leadership wants like a top-down vision of, you know, everyone who's above a certain level makes the vision, and then the rest of the team just executes it. So having the team come up with a vision on their own, like doing their own discovery and saying, okay, here's what it is really scary for those types of teams that are, or those types of organizations that are used to having like, I am the boss and I say so. Sort of are these experts that we hired because they were experts. Trusting them can be hard for some leaders.
So I don't want to, if you're going to get into this, maybe I digress this question, but is that the hesitation with companies going to agile methods? Because then it really is more centric with what's being discovered. I guess there's still some leadership, you know, at say like the sprint reviews that are creating the angle of which things go further, but it's maybe a little bit different from my viewpoint. Maybe that's wrong.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think one of the reasons I haven't experienced this as much lately is because of the shifts to Agile. But I have encountered organizations who said we're Agile, we do sprints, and they haven't actually embraced the spirit of Agile methodologies. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure I've got it exactly, but
Yeah, thank you.
okay, great.
Well, I've also found that sometimes leadership has either forgotten the vision, they could forget it, or they get, especially on the sales side of things, get too interested in the next shiny thing and forget about what's already in flight and forget about the longer term. They get overly fascinated by a quick, hit of revenue.
Yeah, that makes
To
sense.
kind of throw out the vision. It's like, yeah, we're going to do whatever.
Okay. It's one thing that we noticed when working with some of these reactive organizations that were really on the treadmill. We noticed an interesting pattern around hackathons. And that was that hackathons weren't triggering that same fear response, that same level of anxiety that coming up with a vision sort of did. We had a client who was really on the chasing sales treadmill. Priorities change frequently. They'd start a new initiative only to pivot halfway through. If a potential customer even hinted at a feature request, they would just drop everything to follow it. They didn't have enough design and product support to address all these promises that sales was making to these potential customers, which led to silos and exhaustion. Product was over here frantically trying to write requirements, design was furiously making mock-ups, and engineering was just sort of getting tickets dumped on them without a lot of why connected to that. But their teams look forward to hackathons all quarter. They appreciated the opportunities to work on solutions together. They love having time to focus on work, seeing that end-to-end progress, and getting to work on things they care about. And as Christina is saying in the chat, that hackathons feel more like that early stage company environment where you're willing to do things and fail fast. Leadership supported these events. Hackathons gave the team a chance to innovate, but they were constrained enough that the leaders weren't afraid that the team was going to wander off into the wilderness and never come back. Of course, hackathons have some limits. In order to fit into the particular time box, you have to think small. And there isn't always time for research, so ideas aren't always that well informed. Some organizations treat hackathon ideas either as something to just throw away as soon as you're done, like, oh, what wasn't that fun? Or sometimes they just build it as is without a lot of validation. Both can be a bit jarring. So I feel like they rarely lead to that long-term empowerment that we're looking for. But seeing how teams were lighting up over hackathons made us wonder what might happen if we applied the same energy to developing like a lowercase v vision, something that's larger than the hackathon, but smaller than that like capital V vision that everyone feels the need to sign off on and spend months laboring on the deck. What impact might the team have if their work had the time, space, and support needed to be well informed? But before I get too far into solutions, I wanted to get a few things out of the way. I wanted to acknowledge my bias as a designer. This process was originally written with designers in mind, but it does not need to be owned by design. Anyone who cares about empowering a team can advocate for or facilitate this process. I really want this process to be accessible to all disciplines, so please let me know if it feels like I'm leaving other voices out. And because I don't want you to have to sit here thinking, what does this have to do with me? I want to address the role of Agile in this process early. You know that you care about more than productivity, that you want to help a team that's struggling, and you don't want to enable unhealthy patterns. And we hope that by sharing this process with you, that you will gain another tool in your toolkit for empowering teams. Especially when you've tried everything else and nothing's really working, this could be another thing for you to try. Back to our what ifs. So what if there was a way for teams to create a shared vision quickly in a way that strengthened alignment while also delivering tangible value? I'm going to show you 2 examples of how we put this into action with our clients. For our first one, from 2019 to 2020, we worked with a company called Forge. They are a financial startup that built a marketplace for people to buy and sell shares of private companies. Their goal was to address the fact that companies were staying private longer and their employees had to wait to see value from their shares. Meanwhile, their employees are living their lives, like they may need to buy a house or send a kid to college or pay for medical expenses, all these sorts of things that when their finances are tied up in these shares make things more challenging for them. So their marketplace helped employees at those companies turn their private shares and options into cash without having to wait for the company to go public. And then on the flip side, it helped investors acquire shares in companies without having to wait for them to be available in the public market. Part of their transition from startup phase to growth phase involved a change in leadership and a switch from sort of an organic problem-solving strategy to using backlog sprints and planning. There was a lot of pressure to deliver on multiple fronts because this was a pretty large product. And the team really missed solving problems. Concerned that the team was on a path to burnout, leadership was willing to try something new. They had a great initiative in mind for a vision exercise, but had some concerns about carving time out to work on it. Let's see, some context around this initiative. At the time, Forge's platform allowed for trades between sellers and buyers. Individual trades had a lengthy legal process, and if Forge could encourage more batch trades, then they could reduce the legal overhead. So they began exploring opportunities to work directly with private companies. So this included things like liquidity events, where groups of employees could sell shares to investors approved by that private company. They were starting to see traction in building a reputation as a partner with private companies' needs in mind. And while a service like Forge allows companies to stay private longer, companies don't always want to stay private. Once a company goes public, then it can no longer be traded on Forge's marketplace. So in the spirit of supporting companies throughout their the private phase of their life cycle, Forge began looking into ways to help private companies go public. Now, most companies go public through an initial public offering when underwriter is involved in creating shares and setting the share price. While working with an underwriter reduces risk for the company, an IPO can be a time-consuming process. Companies have to raise money. They have to do this thing called a roadshow to drum up interest from institutional investors. It can also be really expensive. Underwriters charge a fee per share ranging from 3.5 to 7%, which means millions of dollars from an IPO go to intermediaries, not shareholders or employees. And not all employees are able to trade at the same time, which can lead to resentment as some employees see a lower return than others. But there's another option, which is direct listings. In direct listings, instead of raising new outside capital, the company's employees and investors convert their ownership into stock that then is listed directly on the stock exchange. Once listed, shares can be purchased by the public, and existing shareholders can cash out at any time, avoiding the lockup period of traditional IPOs. Spotify went public using direct listings in 2018, Slack in 2019. So by expanding their business to provide a direct listing service, Forge could tap into revenue stream, and continue to build trust with private companies. But this type of expansion was a big bet, and a new service like this was full of unknowns and ran the risk of ballooning into a huge project. I know that this is a lot of backstory and context. Have I lost anyone? Am I doing okay so far? Okay. So Forge's leadership team asked the team to come up with a vision for direct listings. And this might sound like an easy win, like we get to focus on vision. We didn't have to argue for this process. They said, hey, let's do this, get to come up with solutions. But like any organization under pressure, they still had concerns that we needed to address. For this group, just looking back at this ask of, how might we offer private companies the ability to go public directly with Forge, what might be challenging about this ask? Where do you anticipate there might be like friction or risks in creating a vision for this type of service? If this was asked of your team, what might you be excited or hesitant about working on something like this? For me, scope was one that was a little bit concerning. This seems like a pretty big ask right here. The leadership had their own concerns.
Maybe generalization. I mean, you
Mhm.
can't cater to everybody. I mean, even though they might be the same size-ish of company, they're doing very different things. So they have different, I don't know, visions and missions, and that affects how they go about it. And I think someone in the chat said regulations. That was the other thing.
Yeah, I see Tammy said that. Yeah, this is a highly regulated industry too, so there was a lot of nuance to look at and make sure that all of the ducks are in a row, which is challenging. From purely like, can we spend time on this perspective? If Forge was concerned, they didn't feel like they could spare product engineering for this effort without slowing down delivery in other areas. And I will admit that while I had 2 other designers available to work with me, I didn't really like this idea of it being a design-only endeavor. I feel strongly that we need cross-functional perspectives to do our best work. Otherwise, we can get wildly off target or come up with things that are maybe very usable and very desirable, but not necessarily very feasible or well-informed. So we decided on a hybrid model where design would be the daily driver of this work, but with scheduled pair sessions with the product and engineering lead so that we didn't get too far in the weeds. So we're planning on checking in with them fairly regularly. Like many organizations, concerned that this process was going to take too long. And I do want to acknowledge that design work, how long design work takes can be something of a mystery. In our day-to-day sprint work, we've got reviews and approvals, revisions, and it can be hard to estimate how much time that's going to take. A lot of times our work as designers is more in bringing people along, and sometimes that takes longer than we expect. Since this work was outside of that normal process, and we had a little bit more range to work with, we decided that we tackle this initiative at a really high level. We wanted to constrain ourselves by focusing on opportunities to learn about what was valuable to customers rather than on creating mock-ups. So we wanted to stick to low fidelity sketches, not investigate every edge case. And this allowed us to put reasonable time boxes on our work. We also held to a principle that we'd be transparent if the scope or time boxes needed to change and give our rationales as to why. Of course, saying we wanted to take a high-level approach raised a few red flags with our leadership partners. If they're not getting a mock-up that they can write tickets from, then what are they getting? This took a little negotiation. We aligned with them on desired outcomes, and we held a principle that our goal would be to come back with opportunities for tangible customer value. These opportunities could be negotiated, expanded on, refined. Like, we would still be thinking about how can we find these pieces of value and work towards them, just not with here is a finished product. There's still going to be some space around there. If this was your team, what else might you have done to address leadership concerns? Like, what concerns might you expect leaders that you work with to have?
Are you setting up project scope so that you, I guess for major milestones then, it's kind of scrum or fall in a way?
Yeah, a little bit. And answering your question in the chat, we only had designers available for this particular project, and at the time, the organization didn't have UX researchers. I believe they do now. I would have loved to have had one on this, so we were just sort of working as both UX researcher and designer at the same time.
Did you have quantitative feedback that you could share so that you had some sort of visual deliverables, or was it more qualitative?
Let's see, we had a combination of kind of like sketches and scenarios. We didn't have that much quantitative since it was a totally new product. But remind me to come back to that. Yes, I'll think about that some more. The way we set up our time blocks was we wanted to spend a little time just getting deeper into the problem and the context, see if we couldn't scope things down a bit more. Spend some time exploring different possibilities, validating those possibilities, and then socializing the story. We also modified our Jira board in order to track progress and scheduled check-ins with leadership in order to be transparent about where we were in the progress or in the process. We wanted them to know what to expect and for us to be able to keep them in the loop. If you're looking at these phases and it feels familiar, well, this is essentially a design thinking exercise. We were discovering, defining, testing, learning, the same way we would if we were doing discovery or making an MVP. Those are pretty time-proven practices, so we built our structure around them. Let's see, in our first phase, we worked to answer 2 questions. What might we need to know about the problem, the people, and the experience today so that we can make informed recommendations? And how might we approach this effort to learn quickly? Oops, there's the other one. Since this phase is all about building the 30,000-foot view quickly and using it to focus and learn, this phase is all about doing that. And since the scope of this ask was pretty large, narrowing it down would be a key component of the work. So at the end of this phase, we aim to have a story of the experience today and an idea of the most critical parts to explore solutions from.
It's like a true value discovery. What is really of value to the customer, and turn it into a story before doing any mock-ups. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yep. We found at many organizations, not just this one, but a lot of times discovery kind of gets pushed into make mock-ups. You're going to discover what mock-ups you're going to make. So every opportunity we can to take it back to what is valuable to a customer is really key. Let's see. For phase 1, when we looked at the high-level customer, at all the high-level customers, both internal and external, visualize their experience, call out any particularly challenging parts, and what products and services existing products and services this new service might need to align with. Here, I'm just trying to summarize like all the things that we brought together. We paired with our subject matter experts to understand the parts of the process that were most risky, and where they believed it had the most value to customers. But as Hari in the comments pointed out, and as we all know, like this would be a great opportunity to talk to a real customer and validate, are these pains really the pains? Are these moments really the important moments in the journey? Do we understand this correctly? Like, do we have a sense of what it's like for a real customer? Unfortunately, like many organizations, this one was not yet comfortable with the idea of talking to customers directly, especially about something new. They were getting there. I've seen this before with heavily regulated industries, like in financial stuff. They're hesitant to share some work in progress. So sometimes it takes a little bit of chipping away at that. We were able to do the next best thing for this, which is someone in the organization had been through a traditional IPO process in the role of the listing company admin. So similar to our target customer, which that really brought my stress level down, because if we were just going based on like, oh yeah, it should have this, it should have that, that doesn't really work for me. But we had someone who's like, I did this and it looked like that. They hadn't been through a direct listing before, but we could talk to them about, here's the idea of a direct listing. Where does that cause you concern? Where does that sound like something that would be desirable to you? Oh, I included this as an example of the level of fidelity we were working at, which we were using a lot of Post-its and Sharpies. This rough journey map was created in a conversation with the leads from the organization and partnership teams. So as they sketched how this process worked, or as they talked about how this process worked, we sketched in real time. What's great with these stickies is when we mess something up, we just put another sticky on top of it and say, oh no, it's like this. Okay, it's like this. This sketch calls out the phases of the journey, the actors and actions, and key moments along the way. We used this in our sync with leadership to help us align on areas of focus. With Forge, looping in leadership at different checkpoints helped them feel more connected to the process. This might not be true of every organization. I've worked with some organizations where leaders were like, I'm busy, I don't need to hear every little detail. But for this organization, they really appreciated the opportunity to hear what we were learning kind of in more real time than waiting till the end. This allowed us the opportunity to say, do our hypotheses about how we should narrow scope align with what you're thinking and the larger leadership strategy. I know these samples aren't especially readable. I've got samples that are in a FigJam that you can zoom in on and actually read the text on this guides.lab0.com page. And I believe that's should be under a vision and roadmap section. It should have, I think, the same title as the presentation. So don't worry if you can't read this. It's also, a lot of this is my handwriting, which is terrible. But there's usually typed versions of the important information on that same page.
I have a question.
Sure.
So visualization is always a messy process. Either you have visualization which is too high up and it's like, apple pie and motherhood. Nobody can find any issues with it, or it is somewhere down where you have the potential for finding areas of contention and disagreement. But irrespective of where it is, how else do you see this thing happening? Visioning has to happen somewhere by somebody. And if the concept is that visioning is going to happen with the product management group and they're going to do it in their little cubby holes, I don't think that process works, right? This is the direct process on how to go about visioning. Am I wrong in assuming that?
No, I think that there is definitely the opportunity if lots of teams are doing these small visions all over the place, like what's to keep them coordinated? There's still got to be an organizational level North Star that the things, that things circle back to. Otherwise, you're just ending up with a lot of disparate little pieces. So, in this case, we were trying it with a smaller group. So it wasn't happening with lots of teams all at once. And we were trying to stay somewhat coordinated with leadership because leadership was able to agree on an initiative that they thought was kind of the right size for this. Let's see. But no, I think you're right. There's definitely big risks for this to go way off into a fractured state if there's not something larger holding it all together.
So I'm pretty sure you're familiar with people using SAFE framework. And SAFE framework is on the agile side. Are you thinking that there should be a similar framework on visioning side?
I think that could be helpful. I mean, one of the things we use a lot on the design side are kind of design principles. And I've seen other leaders in that space talk about how principles can filter down to each level in each swim lane in order to stay aligned. That's something that I want to learn more about and hear more about, because I feel like with product vision, these design principles also often get created and then ignored. So how we bring them in, I think that there's still a lot of room to explore there. Hope that doesn't sound like I'm dismissing the concern, but I do think that there's work to do.
So one area of concern, or one area that is worth thinking about, is when you have an explosion of personas, which is what a very large pulling in of visioning activities is going to create, it normally becomes much more complicated to put it all together. It's almost like worthwhile thinking about a hotel in floors at a time, rather than trying to think of it, the entire thing from the top to the bottom, all in one, only because of the size and the complexity. And the fact that in a case like this, you're going to have personas coming out of our ears. Does it make sense to go in that direction? Or does it make sense to have a very lightweight overlay which says the colors and the structures look similar, but underlying you're going to have some differences simply because it's not the same group of people using the entire product?
Yeah, I would say I agree with that, with having having the lightweight and flexible vision to inform all these different pieces. That is something that I would want and is valuable to me. I think as far as the too many personas, at least within this client, there was the personas that I talked about previously were part of a set. Most of them overlapped with other places in the product. The ones that were kind of specific to this are like listing company admin. So I'm not too worried about that, but I do. Yes, it needs coordination. It needs alignment. As far as like a small one-off exercise, I'm not concerned. But yeah, the scale that you're talking about, I would want to have, what you were saying about having this lightweight framework that can then inform the different activities. That also gives teams in this situation a bit of a head start, because they know overall what the values of the company are and are informing that. That should be the way it is in all aspects of business. that the mission and values are informing everything that we're doing. You know, from sales choices to software choices, everything in between should be informed by that, by those principles. And often their companies aren't investing in that. They aren't taking that time. So this was sort of something that we started doing when there was a gap. We saw that gap often with these companies that were going from their startup phase to their growth phase. Because as a startup, you know, when they were 10 people sitting around, they didn't really need to think about the alignment. And as they started growing, then it was sort of like, oh, well, we're too busy to think about the alignment. So, you know, this is one of, I think, many different ways you could approach this problem. I really like what you're saying about having a more coordinated piece to hold it all together. I hope I've gotten that right. Let's see. Coming back to this example, well, one of the things that we addressed with that staff member who'd been through the IPO process, when we talked to them about their concerns with direct listings, you know, not with the IPO, the underwriter sets the share price, so they know what it's going to be. And if they are unhappy with that share price, they can say, okay, we're not going to do this. But when you're going directly to the market, you may think your share price is one number, and then trading starts and it's much lower. That's pretty risky for companies. And some companies are willing to take that risk, but a lot of them were not comfortable with that level of risk. But since Forge has this private market, they have the ability to help companies estimate their share value. So they can decide, do I still want to go public or not? So that kind of had the benefits of the roadshow side of the IPO without, you know, without CEOs having to fly all over the place and do the show part. So we decided for the purpose of this exploration, we were going to focus on just how do we get a realistic share price in front of the listing company admin so they can make the decision to either go public or wait. So, you know, we've narrowed down the scope quite a bit. We've confirmed the problem, although it was through a proxy, so it's still a little bit hesitant up there. But already this is a lot smaller and clearer to help us stay in our time box. With the exploration phase, you know, our goal was to create a compelling story about the future and we wanted to create something that was tangible enough to learn from, but not something that was ready to build. And that's really challenging for a lot of organizations. If we're like, why can't we just design it now? Like, why do we have to go through this process? But we've learned that software isn't always the solution. And when we're focusing on the value we want to deliver over where we want the pixels to go, it really helps us see opportunities to deliver faster. We can explore opportunities from multiple angles, and we leave room for autonomy. Like, we don't have the whole delivery team in this conversation, so we want to give just enough shape to inspire the team without being prescriptive. We don't want to come to them with a fully baked or 90% baked solution. Otherwise, they're in the same position of it's just more tickets and not really problem solving. In my Forge example, we took over a conference room with sketches and scenarios exploring different concepts. We walked the subject matter experts through these scenarios to get more information on like the legal and regulatory requirements. But you might see a little bit of an anti-pattern here. You know, I just said that software might not be the solution, and we clearly took a software is the solution approach. We thought we were being lean by sketching by hand, but we were starting to get a little too into the details, and we could have probably started smaller. This is something we realized more in hindsight than at the time. We were trying not to be too critical of ourselves. It takes time to change how work gets done, so we said, okay, how are we going to fix it next time? But an upside to going maybe a little too into the details was that our story was clear and helped us in our conversations with engineering. So while we'd imagined this as a product portal, we learned from engineering partners that the technology needed to make this data update in real time was at least a quarter out. 2 or more if they needed to build the whole portal and all of the other features that we were describing in our sketches. You can see here that there's the price data, and then there's a whole nother part of the page that's not price data. And so this check-in was a great reminder that we were trying to focus on that value piece. Like a portable could be value, but which was more important to us, getting the share price in front of the listing company admin or creating a full featured product. Engineering was a great partner in helping us understand what short-term solutions were available to get value to customers while the team could focus on building out the real-time data side. They're really excited about thinking the problems in terms of what could be done without software and contributed a lot of ideas. Had we been designing to build, it would have been hard to hear, oh, this story isn't feasible right now from our eng partner. But because we were trying to tell a story to learn, we were able to stop and say, okay, well, what would make for a better story? So at the end of phase 2, we had a hypothesis about what data we wanted to test. And then we also had 3 possible solutions to validate, or solution concepts to validate. One was a low-tech solution that we could use like fairly quickly. Another was a portal, but something not real time that could be built somewhat quickly. So reduced scope, reduced features. And then one that was more had real-time data, was more feature rich, but would take a lot longer to build. So we were able to have this frank discussion about the value effort trade-offs. I found that when we're designing to build, it can be really hard to stay away from the bells and whistles end of the solution spectrum. Many times I've worked with teams that called what they were doing an MVP, when really they meant a full feature-rich product that will take years to build. I feel like that's a pretty common thing, especially it comes out of a place of enthusiasm that people have ideas to contribute, but not always the same as an MVP. So here we're trying to acknowledge that the bells and whistles is an option should we choose to pursue it. But before we do that, we need to validate to make sure things are on the right track. And now the goal of validating it is to confirm what's valuable and usable, that we're addressing the right customers, their key moment is the right moment, and that we that our minimal solutions meet the need, or like, can we go smaller? And we know that this needs to be done with a real customer. And of course, they still weren't ready. So we went back to our proxy for feedback. And since this isn't being designed to build, we had a little bit more space there, saying, okay, well, before we go into this whole bells and whistles concepts, like, we're absolutely going to have to talk to real customers, because you're going to sink a lot of time into this. Maybe you want to consider something smaller. One helpful thing that our proxy mentioned was that while the listing company admin is the buyer of the product, without the company employees using it, it's not likely to be successful. So we brought this up with leadership, and we suggested that once we were done with this price discovery work, that we take a few additional weeks and address the employee engagement as our next key moment. And because we were upfront about this potential change, and the value we might see from that change, leadership was pretty satisfied that we could safely expand the scope without, continuing to balloon things. I guess we only had this one kernel customer. The validation was pretty short, only took about 3 days. But if you were actually working with customers, real customers outside of the company, I would expect it to take longer to coordinate people's schedules, depending on the volume of people you talk to. That's more feedback that you need to make sense of. But that's more value that you get out of it, and more confidence in the story that you're telling. In this last phase, this one I feel like is the most critical. As folks mentioned before, that often visions aren't shared, and no one will get a chance to get excited about a vision or feel empowered to contribute if you don't share it with them. There are 2 parts to this phase. The first part, we want to make sure we're telling a concise, accessible story to communicate the why of the vision and what's important. And then the second part of this phase is about collaborating with the rest of the team on what to do with what we've learned. So accessible story gives the audience just enough what for context, but stays focused on why. So for the purpose of our vision, we don't need to include every twist and turn from our learning. This one, as you might be able to guess, was pretty challenging for me. I like to give people all of the information, but I have learned that even if you give people the exact same information you have, they may come to a completely different conclusion. So it's usually better to kind of focus on what's important, because people might not engage with things at all if it's too long. Let's see. I think that the important thing to keep in mind is that you want to think about what someone who wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations of creating this needs to know in order to engage with it. Is the value clear? Are the options clear? If we're going too far into the what of this potential solution or the how it might be done, that could be a good opportunity to take that information and put it into a resource somewhere else and link to it. Because people who are really curious about all those details will go to it, and people who won't will get the important information without all of the distraction. And at the very least, this is a good bookmark to yourself to refer to this information in the future. I want to share a little bit about what the price discovery story looked like. We had a quick summary of what the moment is, prioritized list of the critical user needs that this moment must address. And then we give examples of what would be that smallest increment versus the kind of bells and whistles side of things. This also came with an image. So here's an example of, in this case, we packaged it up with other key moments that were related to the same direct listings concept. That way we could group some of the context and journey information together. So there was a visual side and then the text content. This team originally shared their work in Confluence. I put it in FigJam just to make it a little bit easier to present in a different context. But you can use any tool that works for your team, just as long as anyone on the team can access it, comment on it, revise, ask questions. If you want to see all the details of what this looked like, and there's a template available, that's also in that guides.labzero.com webpage. All right, and that second part of sharing the vision was collaborating on what comes next. we had this conversation with the leadership team and the wider team that wasn't a part of the vision process. So that was the product and engineering teams, including the leads that we were checking in with, but also their broader teams. And the broader team really engaged with this collaboration step. Because they weren't a part of the day-to-day work of this exercise, they could have felt left out. But I feel like it's because we were coming to them with a problem to solve and like potential solutions to investigate, rather than like, here is the design. They really engaged with the vision and they made it their own. Some ways they did that, we collaborated on what sort of things should go on the roadmap. They asked a lot of great questions and gave a lot of ideas, which helped fuel a backlog of what more we needed to learn and validate. As they talked, they also aligned on a definition of ready. So for this particular information, like, okay, some of these things we could do a tech spike for, or some of these things we should do some user testing for and actually get a user. That sort of thing of like, what are the next steps we're going to take? And ultimately, Forge chose to pursue the manual no-code solution as their starting point, which did put more burden on their operations team, because that was more that the team was going to have to do to kind of handhold the listing company through the process. But they were still able to get the process started while they built out the data stuff. And so engineering had time to address the real-time data issue. When it comes to measuring the success of this work, we listen to how teams talk about the vision. Does it come up in conversation, working session, design reviews? Do we see traffic on Figma or Confluence's analytics? So you feel like if it's valuable and well socialized, people will refer back to it. We also measured the outcomes of each increment with customers. Did we address their need effectively? And also engaging the team the same way we would a customer, asking for their feedback on the process. What went smoothly, what didn't? Do they want to try this process again? Why or why not? Helps us tailor the process to each individual team's needs. If you're not hearing these signals, it's worth understanding where the gap is. Like, was the vision not socialized well? Did the team not connect with it? And if they didn't, why? One reason you might see a vision start to fade is we've learned something new and it's time to retire it. Learn something else. For the direct listings example, we unfortunately completed this work for Forge in the spring of 2020, right basically in April of 2020. And as you can imagine, the pandemic caused quite a shift in their priorities. So they had to pause to focus on some short-term needs. Normally, a pivot and pause like that would mean starting over from zero. But thanks to a successful phase 4, Forge had all this information and mini roadmap ready to go when they came back. I don't really want to advocate a benefit of this process being that you can drop it and come back to it later, but I was happy to see that it survived a real world scenario. When they did build something, they didn't build exactly what we sketched, and that's great. I'm very happy about that. They used what we learned to make their own decisions to get to the value that the vision was describing. And they also used this work to inform other products and services down the line. There were some that had similar scenarios, similar customer needs, and having everything put together in this way really helped those teams get a head start. One of their product leaders told us, I refer to this work weekly, if not more. And as a consultant, that's one of the highest compliments you can pay me. It means the world to me when our processes live on beyond our contracts. Any questions so far? If we're good on time, I'd like to jump to another example. With this other client, we had to adapt the process to meet their needs in a slightly different way. This is a very recent client. They've not yet had a chance to build from this vision, so I don't want to share visual samples of their work. But I will share a little bit more about how the processes differed and what they learned from them. This client offers a niche tool to clients in the financial space. It provides powerful data modeling and reporting features that helps their customers make investment decisions on behalf of a larger organization. It's been really successful so far. It has a loyal customer following, but because their target customer is so specialized, they have to rely on wooing customers away from their competitors to grow. And the complexity of the sales environment, the customer needs, the product, all have been driving the organization to prioritize innovation less and the speed of response to potential customer requests more. Have any of you experienced something like that, of where the system, either the sales environment or the product is so complex that people just kind of head off in the speed direction?
Plenty.
Yeah, plenty. Under this customer request pressure, the team I felt like they could never catch up. What they were working on changed so frequently that the team was rapidly becoming disempowered. They had a discovery phase as part of their work, but it was geared more towards writing requirements to get approval than a focus on customer value. So now we've got all these smart, capable people with really deep expertise, feeling like they had to wait to be told what to do. And in a highly complex environment like this, the faster they tried to move, like the less value they were ending up delivering. And so the team and leadership knew that they had to work smarter.
Tracey, just for the time check, maybe we'll focus more on what did you do differently for them, how it was
Sure.
different from the first scenario. So difference is very interesting.
Okay, great. One thing I will say quickly on this is there was the ask from customers was to be able to see data on past performance. And that sounds really straightforward, but it is not. And it's not because the UI and the database weren't designed for that. They were designed for something entirely different. There were a ton of edge cases, a ton of use cases, and a ton of risks. So what they needed here was more discovery, really, than vision. But their discovery process wasn't collaborative and wasn't customer focused, which seems like a weird thing to say because they're doing nothing but responding to customer requests. Like, how is that not customer focused? But responding to a request quickly and actually meeting a customer's needs are different things here. So because discovery meant something else to this team, we kind of modified the vision exercise to help the team work in a different way. So we're still using the same kind of principles, structure, transparency, and focus on value that we did with Forge, but with a few variations. Or Forge was trying to imagine what was possible. This client was trying to determine, like, is the feature possible at all? So the team had slightly different needs. Like a really deep understanding of the data was required. There was a very strong pressure to design to build. And all of their focus was on mitigating risk over value. And I think that they adapted to that in some really great ways. Like they pulled in a subject matter expert as part of their day-to-day activities, so that they could reduce some of the time it took to get up to speed with how this data actually worked and why it was so complex. They took that like go, deliver sort of energy and anxiety that they were getting to push this towards user testing. And I think that really helped set them up well for actually getting to talk to outside customers. In trying to mitigate the risks, they pulled in the sales team and said, all right, you're going to be our partners in connecting us with real customers. This is also a great example of a situation where they could go high fidelity because they're trying to understand the usability component. It really made sense to mock things up in Figma and use a clickable prototype in talking to the real customers, rather than sketching at the high level. So they weren't just making mock-ups to make them, like they were focused on learning. Let's see. So the share phase for this team was presenting to leadership, what they learned and the options for mitigating risks. Leadership was really engaged with this. They felt confident in the way the team addressed the risks, and they saw value in the team's approach and even suggested additional validation opportunities, which was great. It's always great to hear organizations want to lean more into talking to customers. This activity helped make space for a healthy discovery process that was more collaborative and had customer needs in mind. The initiative is still in progress, so we're hoping to hear soon from this client about what impact the activity had for their team and customers. But while the output wasn't technically a vision, I think the confidence that it built with this team of like, oh, right, we are very smart, capable people. We can figure these things out. We don't need to just like wait until a ticket comes in. I think that really helped them kind of regain the empowerment that they had when they were a much smaller company. And that was really great to hear. Okay, I know that was a lot. So I just want to do a quick recap before we move into the discussion section. Just sort of when and why to use this process. We found that it's helpful when your team is feeling stuck, or they're kind of slipping into discovery-focused silos, like product is writing a requirement, design is mocking things up, the waterfall in sprints kind of behavior, or you've got a big bet or complex problem that needs a new approach. Carving out a time box to align on vision helps build your team's confidence, strengthens their focus on value, and then the alignment empowers them to make decisions towards a shared goal. Let's see. We talked about keeping your scope narrow to a particular customer problem or key moment to help keep the exercise achievable. We talked about how the structured process keeps us focused and on schedule. Ways transparency and well-timed check-ins can build trust. And how a focus on customer needs and value can help the team produce a more tangible result. A few other things that this process reminded us, cross-functional teams build strong ideas. Alignment reduces confusion. Just enough helps us create to learn rather than to build. Validation, always key, especially with real users. Socializing your vision and collaborating around what's next really lay the foundation for your team to become empowered. One more thing quickly, which is on repeating this process. In our Forge example, they repeated the process several times, including a few times without us, which was great to hear. And one thing that they found valuable was swapping out team members so that everybody got a chance to contribute, or everybody wanted to have a chance to contribute and learn those skills. But so that the team doesn't have to start from scratch each time having at least one person in common from one initiative to the next was helpful. If you were facilitating for a team, I think that would be, you would be a good constant. And also we expect this process to evolve. Every organization is unique, and teams will adapt processes like these to their needs. So if you run something like this with one of your teams, we'd love to hear more about how it went, what you thought was valuable or particularly challenging.
Great.
Oh, go ahead.
I think it's a good time. I'll stop recording.